Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're with us today. So we are going to be talking about a really important parenting topic, one that helps us to have better, happier, healthier relationships with our kids and also our kids with us. And that is about setting boundaries and having limits and enforcing them. I think this can be such a hard topic, but so important. So we have an expert with us, Dr. Ann Welsh, and she is going to talk to us about how to do this in our relationships and how to follow through. With that, let's get to Dr. Welsh.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes. And as we were getting ready for this interview, I was telling you, this is a topic that's hard for me. I think setting boundaries and having limits and enforcing them is sometimes really hard.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard for everybody. That's maybe the hidden truth. It's one of those places where, people say it's simple or just do X, Y, or Z and it'll be easy. And that's not reality. It's never just do X, Y, or Z. That's actually usually pretty bad advice. I mean, there are tools and tips we can frame it around, but anyone who tells you it's simple is probably missing some nuance that's actually quite important.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. I think, when we hear boundaries and we hear limit setting, there is some nuance between that. And I think, what is the difference? Can you explain to us what the difference between setting boundaries is and what having limits are?
Yeah. I think one way to frame it is limits are kind of the rules, right? Limits are the guidelines that we're setting for our kids, right? Our limits when they're little might be, you always have to be buckled in your car seat, or never cross the street without holding my hand. When they're teenagers, your limits might include things around screen time or curfew or whatever, but those are kind of the external rules that we put to keep our kids safe and healthy. Boundaries are more interpersonal, right? Boundaries are about our behaviors and our needs and what we will do in response to other people's behaviors. Kids need both, right? They need limits because that's what keeps them safe, right? They don't necessarily have the cognitive capacity to make decisions that are always healthy and well for them. But they also need boundaries as part of their growing understanding of individual autonomy and how to navigate relationships, right? So they need both. And sometimes they do overlap, right? Sometimes we have a limit and we use kind of boundaries to help enforce it. But so it's kind of more like a Venn diagram than two completely separate constructs, but there are some differences in them.
Yeah. Well, and when I also think about boundaries, I think about that's for the parents' well-being too, right?
Yeah.
And obviously for the kids too, but thinking about I'm setting a boundary because this is for me, right? For my well-being, taking care of myself, and what I'm willing to do, right? And a limit, like you said, is the rule. That's a great explanation. But I think sometimes I have to remind myself, we have to have boundaries, right? Of what I'm okay with. I may help my kid with their homework, but I'm not going to do it for them. Right. So that's my boundary, right? But the rule is we have to have the homework done. And so that's how you can kind of see the difference. And so both of those, as you can imagine, are so critical of what are we willing to do? What is somebody else willing to do? And oftentimes I think boundaries get a bad name, right? Sometimes people will say things people set a limit with somebody and then they're oh yeah, they're boundaries, right? And kind of push that off, but it's so important.
Well, and I think kids and adults, we don't like to be on the receiving end of someone else's boundary usually, right? And so I think sometimes that's where boundaries maybe get a bad rap. It's I don't want to hear no from someone else. And again, it's really important that we all have the capacity to say no, or here's what I need, or here's what I'm going to do in response to your behavior, right? We do need them as adults too. It's actually what keeps us as adults safe in the world and kind of allows us to trust ourselves to manage a situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is critical. And our parents our kids are looking to us as parents
For
to
sure.
also do that,
Yeah.
which is what also makes it so important to have boundaries too, and to be able to set these limits. So I think sometimes I find that parents find it easier to set limits for their kids, but to not enforce their own personal boundaries. Do you see that?
For sure, because I think, sometimes we're really clear on what the limits are and why, right? So again, the example I used of wearing a seatbelt or staying in your car seat or whatever, we're all pretty crystal clear on why we have that limit. And so we're not going to veer from it, right? This is the thing that will allow us to travel in the car safely and get where we need to go. And I have no doubt about that. If my, kid says, I'm not going to put on my seatbelt, then I will literally sit and park until they choose to, because I trust that limit for myself. And I have no kind of doubt in my mind about the importance of it.
Yeah.
I think boundaries sometimes feel more like a choice, and that's where we get stuck enforcing them. I think a lot of moms in particular, but all parents, sometimes we get into the space of, well, I can, so I must, right? Someone asks me to do this thing, I can do it. I kind of don't want to. I might feel resentful, but because I can, I should. Or my kid is asking for my time and I'm really fried and actually I could use some downtime, but I say yes because I physically am capable of doing it, and it would be a choice to say no. So we're not as clear sometimes, I think, with boundaries on what the benefit is. And then it's harder to uphold them because we may be disappointing someone else. If I'm disappointing my kid by making them wear a seatbelt, I'm less concerned because I know it's going to keep them safe. If the boundary is I disappoint my kid because I need some time to myself or I need something, then it's a little harder, I think, in that case to hold on to the why and why it's important.
Yeah. And so this makes me think of a situation that happened for me yesterday. I was doing some work on my computer, which I try not to do a ton of work at home, but sometimes there's just some things that have to be done. And so I had let all the kids know, like, hey, we have a whole house full of toys and things for you to do, right? And they have each other. And so I was like, I need to sit on my computer for 1 hour. And then when I'm done with this, we'll do something fun together. And they had decided a puzzle. So I was like, cool. Except for my 6-year-old kept coming up to me like every 2 minutes and is like, can you print off this picture? Like you're on your computer. So can you print this coloring page for me? Can you print this color page? And I was like, okay, like I did one and I was like, okay, color this. Right. But she was like super speedy and doing it. And then she was like, okay, can I have another one? And I was like, no. And then she it's like that no went away. She went away and then she came back and she was like, can you just print one more and then I'll be done? And I was like, okay, fine. So then I did. And guess what happened? She came back for another one. Right. So then I was like I found myself frustrated because I was like, why didn't I just hold the boundary before? Because like every time she's coming up to ask me for something, I'm getting out of my mode of doing the stuff on my computer, which is taking more time. And then I'm not getting as much done, which means, all these things like I'm thinking in my head. And so what advice do you have on holding boundaries since, talking about this, like they're kind of negotiable and we can feel that way. And obviously I can feel that way too. So tell me what advice you have for that.
Well, a couple of things. So, one, just to get a little bit into the cognitive science behind it, the more consistent we are with boundaries, the better. And so one way to look at what happened with your kid is something called intermittent reinforcement, right? And so when we do a behavior and we're rewarded only some of the time and in an unpredictable way, it's actually going to take a lot longer for us to stop trying to do that behavior. This is why slot machines, people get hooked on them, right? Yeah. So you put the coin in and sometimes you lose and sometimes you win and it's not on any schedule. So you keep doing it. Like you essentially, a lot of people never learn to stop playing the slot machine. And you can see how that plays out with your kids, right? So she asked one time and she got a no, but then she asked the next time and she got a yes. So she's just going to keep asking over and over again. So understanding that is part of what goes into understanding that we ideally are being consistent. Now, I get it. Sometimes as parents, we're not going to be consistent, but ideally we are being consistent with our boundaries, because what happens is if we say, I need an hour on the computer, I have to get this done. You guys entertain yourself. And when you're done, I will be able to focus 100% on you. And that's how I like to parent. So then she asks and you say no every time. She might ask 3 or 4 times, right? Kids are going to push back on your boundaries, as are adults. But if it's a consistent no, she'll stop asking sooner.
Yes.
Right. And the other piece I would say is the clarity, right? As saying, no, not only might you say no, but say, no, I can't, because, and to add, every time you ask me, that pulls my attention away from what I'm doing. And it's going to take me longer to get what I am trying to do done. Sometimes with my kids, since mine are, teenagers and school age kids, I'll use computer analogies. I'm like, every time you ask me, it's like you open another tab on this computer, and I now have like 40 tabs open, and I'm working a little slower, just like if you have 40 tabs open on your computer. I'm trying to keep just one tab open for this hour, and then I will close it, and the only tab I will have open is you guys, right? So a lot of communication, especially with kids. It may be a little different with adults, but with kids, we want them to understand, right? We're actually teaching them about boundaries as we set them.
Yes.
In practice, is that what it looks like for me every time? No, because I'm a human being as well, but that's the theory.
Yeah. And keeping that intermittent reinforcement, which I think, consistently reinforcing what you want to happen, right, is the most successful for everybody, because then we know what the expectation is. It's hard, but like thinking about in those moments of like, what am I reinforcing, right? Like what behavior am I encouraging my kid to keep doing? And so thinking about in that moment of like me printing off that picture, because it felt like, okay, like I'll just do this and then I'll be able to get back to this and we'll move on. But then that wasn't really how it went, right? And so then that became frustrating for me. So reminding myself, right, like what am I reinforcing? What do I really want to happen here? So what are other signs that parents might not be reinforcing their boundaries enough? Like what might they see in their kids' behaviors?
Yeah. Well, I think it's more about paying attention to what feels like is coming up for you around boundaries, right? Because when we're thinking about boundaries, it is, it's focused on your behavior. What am I going to do, or how am I going to handle this request, and what my behavior is going to be? We cannot make our children do anything, really. Yeah. But what are some of the signs that our boundaries maybe need working on? If we're chronically overwhelmed, right? That means we're probably saying yes to too many things. If we're neglecting ourselves. I think there are a couple feelings that I always point out are probably at least a part of a boundaries conversation, is if you're feeling really resentful of your kids or of your partner or of anybody, if you're feeling really underappreciated, or if you're feeling really angry, right? Either at yourself for saying yes to everything, or at other people for asking, right? Because other people get to ask. But if you find yourself feeling angry, it might be that there's some boundary stuff coming up. Those are some of the feelings I always kind of suggest people look out for.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking about like boundaries aren't always about saying no. Right? It might be about saying yes when it looks like this, or yes in part. Right. And so I think saying no, especially for moms, and this is something that I have gotten way better at saying no, although that story earlier did not indicate that. I have really gotten better about saying no, and about like valuing my time and understanding what the choice is, because you are always saying yes to something, right? Yeah. Like it may be no to the thing in front of you, or to this future thing, but then you're saying yes to something else. And that mind shift for me was so pivotal, because, sometimes it's hard for me to leave work on time. Let's be honest, often. So I normally end my day at 7. And so instead of my husband expecting me to leave right at 7, because it's hard to like wrap up that quickly, I've like adjusted my time between, 7:15 and 7:30 so that I have a grace period. But it's like, sometimes it's like, oh, I have this thing that I was supposed to do and whatever. But then I'm like, oh, the sacrifice, like what I'm really giving up here is putting my kids to bed. So if I say yes to this of staying late for something. Obviously, emergencies are not a choice for me professionally, but for things that I can do at a different time, that has been really pivotal for me to see what the cost is on the other side. What am I saying no to by saying yes to this? Or what am I, being able to say yes to by saying no to this?
Yeah. And that's a frame I use with people a lot. And it can be true in so many different situations, right? Like the work is a great example. And there's no right or wrong answers here. That's the other piece, right? Like you could also say, I'm okay with missing bedtime because I am really invested in getting this work done. And this is a time when I can. And I'll be so much more energized when I, wake up in the morning, whatever, right? You can pick either one. But I think even when we're setting limits with our kids, you can use the same frame, right? Of like, if I'm saying no to printing the picture, I'm saying yes to focused work, or I'm saying yes to my kid navigating boredom and kind of self-reliance, right? Or whatever it is. You can always find that yes in there to help you hold on to a boundary that's maybe a little more challenging to set.
Yes. So that kind of leads me to this part of like, we're kind of talking about this, but like sometimes when we set boundaries, we feel like we're in some way like neglecting our kids. And we know that, our kids are our responsibility. Yeah. Right. And I think they are. That's the truth, right? Like if you don't feed your kid, then, like nobody's going to feed your kid for you. Like no one's coming to do that, to do that piece, right? And it doesn't mean that dinner, sometimes we just have scrambled eggs for dinner, right? Like that's an easy dinner, right? But thinking about like, sometimes by setting a boundary, we feel like we're neglecting our kids. What thoughts or advice or like cognitive shifts do you have for that piece?
Yeah, well, so number one, this is kind of, people hear this all the time, but first you have to take care of yourself, right? Like that old adage of put on your own oxygen mask is really important. It's kind of been overplayed, but that's because it's true, right? If you are burnt out and resentful, your kids are going to pick up on that. So yes, you have to feed them dinner, but if it's cereal and that's all you're up for, great, right? That's fine. You are still qualified. That is still feeding them, right? And it's better to have kids fed something that maybe isn't as nutritionally great, but have it done in a positive, healthy environment than mom screaming at them while she gets whatever, chicken and salad on a plate that nobody will eat anyway, right? Like, you kind of have to hold that you need to take care of you. But I think the other piece here is that boundaries are good for everyone. So you actually are meeting a need that they have by setting them, right? Kids need boundaries to feel safe. They have to learn to tolerate other people's boundaries, right? We don't want them going into adulthood having never had anyone set a boundary with them, or they will be really not functional adults, right? So we want them to understand this process and to learn it from us. And, it also helps them understand or develop empathy, which again is another skill we want them to have, right? That they have to learn to tolerate that other people also have needs, and that kind of delayed gratification maybe is an okay thing here, right? So we're teaching them all sort of really, really important emotional intelligence skills by setting boundaries with them. And if you can kind of hold on to that, it might make it a little easier to think about this not as like a net positive for kids rather than a negative experience.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So sometimes when we set limits or have boundaries, we might find that our kids are going to power struggle with us, or it's going to turn into some type of a conflict. And I think maybe there's a difference between how to navigate boundary setting and how to navigate limit setting in terms of those things of avoiding conflict or power struggles, but maybe they're the same. Can you tell us more about like how to navigate that piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a place where there's a ton of overlap, right? And the first thing I always tell parents is, and people, when you're setting boundaries with adults as well, this is normal, right? This is actually healthy in terms of their development. We set the limits kids are going to push against them. Part of their job and why it's important that we set limits is that they need to learn where where they stop and other people end, and they need to learn that there are kind of guardrails in place. That's what those limits are. So they're going to push against them. That's how they learn who they are separate from us, right? Whether they are toddlers or whether they are teenagers, that's part of their job as children. And the other thing is to remember that we cannot make our kids do things directly, right? I mean, sure, you can pick up your toddler and carry them off the park, but I think a lot of times this shows up around food and potty training. Like, you can't force them to eat, you can't force them to toilet train. They have to be invested on their own. We can only control our behavior. So that said, how do you keep it from becoming that power struggle? I mean, so normalize that the kind of is a power struggle, like that's inherent. But one is self-regulation, right, for yourself, and do whatever you need to do. That's kind of number one. So if you are finding yourself in a power struggle and you start to yell, if you can walk away. You always have permission to walk away to get yourself to a place where you can communicate more clearly and more effectively. Or similarly, you can pause the situation to allow them to regulate. Because when people are dysregulated, there's no frontal lobe capacity. Nobody's able to actually talk about what's going on. Nobody's able to learn. A lot of times I'll tell clients, if you're leaving the hospital, they always tell you the baby's crying and you're getting upset, put the baby down, crib, and walk away. We can do that as with older children too, right? We have lots of different ways to safely walk away from a situation so that we can get our own kind of feelings under control and approach it a little bit more rationally. So that's number one. Number two is to tolerate that they're going to have a reaction, right? Part of that pushback is going to be a tantrum. Is going to be a teenager screaming, "I hate you," or slamming their door. They get to have a reaction. That's part of what happens with boundaries. We get to set it. Other people get to have feelings. It's not their job to cheerlead our boundaries. It's just their job to hear them. Then I would also say getting really clear on your boundary and what the limit is and why. You can involve your kid. So that's the other part. This is a little harder with toddlers, but you kind of still can. A little easier with older kids who have the communication capacity. In a situation where you're not immediately having to set it, you can talk to them about what the rules are and why. And they even have suggestions of hey, kiddo, you missed curfew this week and that was really, really bad. And we can't have that happen again. What's your solution for why, what's your explanation for why this happened, and what's the solution to prevent it from happening again? And what do you think an appropriate response would be? Right? But with a 2-year-old, you can say wow, we can't hit. You got really mad and you hit your sister and that hurts. What do you think we should do? Maybe your 2-year-old will be able to say oh, I should probably, not in these words, but maybe they'll just go give their sister a hug or right? You can talk about it with them, but again, not till everybody's regulated. That has to step one. Yeah. So those are the big pieces. And I know that's frustrating because it's, like I said in the beginning, it's not an easy button 1, 2, 3, do this, and you won't ever have a power struggle. You're going to have power struggles. That's part of it. Yeah. It's of how can we navigate them in such a way that everybody gets to learn and grow from them.
Yep. Well, and I think, excuse me, the thing I think about is about, when you get upset, and your refrigerator breaks, right? Your refrigerator's broken and you punch it. Not that I'm suggesting we punch kids, but we punch the refrigerator because we're oh, this is so frustrating, or we yell at it. It doesn't fix the refrigerator. Right. And so the emotional outburst is not resolving the issue. And it's hard to stay calm. It is so hard to stay calm. Right. And I think last night I was putting my newly 3-year-old to sleep, and he was refusing to eat dinner, and it had gone on long enough, and the limit was met. We had set a timer and that was over. And so like, that was his choice. And so we went to go to bed, and then he's like, I want to eat now. And it was like, I want you to eat, but we've, like missed this time and it's time for bed, and he's screaming. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, okay, what skills do I have here? And I was like, co-regulation. Okay, I can breathe. Let me see if I breathe. I do really big, right? Like these really big breaths. And you know what he did? The same thing. And I was like, oh my gosh. Yes. Okay. Success. Right. It was not perfect, but it was like, okay, we at least calmed down to stop yelling. Right. And so it's like thinking about just those things in the moment of like, what tools do you have? Like, what can you do in those moments to calm down, and just like expecting the conflict to happen, expecting the boundaries to be pushed. That I think helps when we have our mind around that thing.
Yeah.
To know that that's going to happen, and that it's part of normal development, and it's part of healthy development too. It's not about being a bad kid. It's not about necessarily like bad parenting, right? It's about like, can we be more consistent? Sure. I'm sure every parent can, right? And that's a good tool to work towards, is as much consistency as you can. But in those moments, it's also just normal. Even if you've been so consistent with what you're doing, that your kid is going to push back. Because I think a lot of times we feel guilty too, or we feel shame, or like, I'm a bad parent, or I didn't do this well because my kid is going through this thing. But a lot of the things that kids go through are normal.
Yeah. And I think you just hit on something so key that I really like talk to folks a lot about, which is that your child's behavior is not your parenting report card. I totally fell into this when my oldest was little, right? It was like, if my kid's upset, if my kid's having an epic 45-minute tantrum, if my kid is pushing back, it must be that I'm parenting wrong. Yeah. And then I feel shame, which makes me feel out of, less regulated, less able to access those skills. And it sets us up in a negative spiral, and it's not good for my kid, right? They shouldn't be responsible for my well-being, right? And so when we normalize that all of this behavior is part of childhood, and that you can be an amazing parent and still have these things happen, and in fact expect for these things to happen, then it takes at least away that layer of shame, right? Yeah. Is often such a painful part of parenting.
Yeah. And so hard, because I think even sometimes within relationships or partnerships, like our spouse or whoever we're parenting with, even like grandparents can be critical of what they think we are or are not doing too. Right. And them saying like, my way is better, or my way is more successful. And we don't have to do it a different way necessarily. Like, we have to do what's comfortable for us. But then also, valuing these limits and being able to enforce them, and also being consistent with our boundaries of like remembering why we would never let our kids go in the car without a seatbelt on.
Right.
Right. And I think if in all of parenting all of my children, this has been a conversation where they're like refusing to put the seatbelt on, and it's like frustrating, because you're just like, oh my gosh, like seriously, are we going to fight about this? But it's also an opportunity to educate, to say like, this is why we do this. And this is why. And I remember our youngest we were driving someplace, and he was like mad, and he was like, I'm going to take off my seatbelt. And we were like, hey dude, if you do that, like, that's dangerous. If a police officer saw that, like, mommy and daddy would get in trouble, because it is the law, excuse me, for you to have your seatbelt on. And he was like, oh, I don't want you to go to jail. We were like, we don't want to go to jail either. Like, this is good. And so then he was like, well, I just tell them. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't work that way. Like, you have to have your seatbelt on. That's how this works. Right. And we hadn't even brought up jail, which was funny that he had brought it up. But, as a kid who is curious and has learned lots of things in the world, he is aware of this. So he, and it was like, okay. So, and then it was like another time he was like, I don't want to wear my seatbelt, but I don't want you to go to jail. And it was like, okay, thank you. Like, that's good. Right. Like, let's put on our seatbelt. And he was able to do it because he understood why we have the limit that's there why that law is in place. It's for safety. But then also I have a boundary around that too, of like, I'm not going to move my car until, or if you take off your seatbelt while we are driving, I'm going to pull over and our car is not going to move. And maybe you don't want to go someplace, right? And so I know there's complexities in parenting and sometimes we need more support, but in general, right? Like our kids generally do want to go where we're going, even if it's not their favorite thing. Like they don't really want to go do that thing or run errands or whatever it is, but they do want that connection too, right? And it's like, so I think remembering that we can reward our kids with more connection too, of like, I'm really proud of you, or words of affirmation, just like telling them how well they did. And so, or appreciating, like when one of my kids, I say like, yeah, I'm not going to do that right now because I have to do this other thing, or I'm making dinner and then I will do that. And when they respect that and like walk away, I'm like, thank you so much for listening to my words. Right. And so then they understand that words have power. And words are important, and what people say, again, where they end and other people start, that space of like respecting other people, it's also gained in this limit setting and boundaries.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you touched on kind of two important pieces of this whole thing, which is one is the connection and validation, right? Like, so let's say your kid is, you're trying to drive to, I don't know, a pediatrician appointment and they don't want to get a shot, right? Mm-hmm. And so they take off their seatbelt as a way of stopping that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could just scream at them and they might put it on because they're scared, but you could also tolerate being maybe 5 or 10 minutes late to that doctor's appointment and say, hey, you really don't want to go to this pediatrician appointment. You really don't want to get a shot. That feels scary. Shots kind of hurt. That stinks. Mm-hmm. I'm really sorry that we have to do this. It's my job to keep you healthy, and this is part of keeping you healthy. Mm-hmm. What can we do to make the situation any better, right? Kids, like adults, we want to be validated in our feelings. And if we can... And I know that I'm saying this as if I can do this all the time, and that's not true, right? I fail at this constantly. But our goal is to be able to validate what their feelings are, and that can really deflate a power struggle if we can do it. And when we're regulated. Yeah. And on the flip side, the other side of it is we reinforce when they do it well, right? Yeah. And again, that's true whether you've got a 2-year-old and you're doing a sticker chart for the potty, or if you've got a teenager. And I think sometimes we forget that the older kids need that positive feedback too, mm-hmm. right? Like, I'm so proud of how you handled that. Or, no, you were really upset and you didn't yell at me. Thank you. Like, I see that. You want to reward them for the stuff that takes work.
Yeah. Well, and we like that as adults too.
Right.
Right? Like when I do something that is even expected of me, but somebody says, hey, thanks for doing that. When my husband will randomly be like, like, I appreciate all of what you do and how hard you work. Right? Like, I know that going to work is part of my job and I love my job. So like going to work is, some days are really hard, but other days are fun and not so hard. And so I think, just being acknowledged for what we're doing is so valuable, especially in this bucket of connection, right? Of like understanding that somebody else sees us and we may not agree with it, right? Like we can validate a feeling we don't agree with. We can say like, you are feeling this, or it feels like this for you, or I wonder if you're feeling this, but it doesn't mean that you have to think that feeling too. You are just noticing what they're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sometimes, a classic example, right? Like of the toddler where they ask for a sandwich and you cut it in squares instead of rectangles, and God help you, they wanted it to be the other one. And they're just losing it. You as an adult have the perspective to be like, yeah, this really doesn't matter. But you can also hold, right? This is empathy. You can hold that you're having a different emotional experience, and just seeing that can be helpful. And again, it's true with adults, with older kids. It's true with everybody. We just want to feel seen.
Yeah. So in those moments, like, let's talk through that, like how we can hold maybe a boundary or a limit that we have in that. So like you cut the sandwich, it's the wrong way, and your kid is literally melting down over a sandwich, and you're thinking like, it's still the same sandwich. It's just not cut your preferred way. Like, get over this. that way probably is not going to work super well. So we're going to validate and say, like, this is really hard for you. Like, I did not do that the way you expected me to do. And that is really upsetting. Would you say, like, at that moment, we can say, like, what could I do to help? Or how can we make this better? Or what ideas do you have? What do you think works for that next piece?
Well, I think all of the above. And this is where a little bit of like, your kid. Mm-hmm. And parenting is not one size fits all, and different kids have different needs. I have 2 kids who are neurodivergent, which neither was diagnosed till they were older. And I think a lot of like what you're told to do kind of classically with toddlers would backfire. Mm-hmm. Like I had my oldest, if in that space I would offer a hug, that would get a complete horrible reaction because he was so sensitive in that moment that any touch actually felt bad, even mm-hmm. gentle, warm hugs. And it was mm-hmm. so challenging as a mom to navigate that. So I want to just put that out there that like, there is no right solution. You don't have mm-hmm. to say, too bad, eat your sandwich or you get no lunch. You can say that, right? It depends on what your boundary is. So your boundary may be, I never make another lunch. So this is lunch. And you can say, what can I do to help you feel better? If you need to leave the table, you can leave the table. You can come back. You could offer to cut the squares now into triangles, like recut the sandwich. But mm-hmm. in the end, it's just pick some solution that fits for you and your mm-hmm. kid in that moment. But I do think involving them is usually a good way to go. Mm-hmm. So, in that moment, what should we do now? Mm-hmm. This is sandwich I made. It's not the sandwich you expected. I'm really sorry. What do you think would help? And maybe mm-hmm. their solution is, can you make me a new sandwich? Maybe their solution is, can we go read a book? Great, mm-hmm. right? And maybe they don't know. And then that's where you can give some choices. Well, I could recut it. We could take a break and try again in 5 minutes, and then you'll know what to expect. We could eat your banana first. Right? Like, you can give them some choice here so that they have autonomy. Because in the end, that was the problem, right? They didn't have autonomy. They didn't get in that moment.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to know that we are wired for that, right? Like, we don't like it when other people make choices for us, even when we're adults, right? So forcing somebody into something is often not the right strategy, which sometimes we forget as parents because we're like, you're a kid, I am a grown up, like, this is the way it is, move on. Well, I find in my own life, in those moments that I've tried that method, even though I know it doesn't work, it doesn't end up saving me any time.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, ultimately, we're all after making this as streamlined as possible, right? Like, as little conflict as possible, knowing that it's going to happen and to navigate through it as easily as possible. And so there are times where, I've been like, I've cut the sandwich wrong. And I've been like, you know what? Like, we clearly are not going to get to another solution until we just make another sandwich. Yes. And like, this is what it is, because I also am raising a whole house of neurodivergent kids. And so sometimes they are able to adjust to this unforeseen way of it being, right? Like, sometimes I'm like, how about we put toothpicks in them? I have these cool toothpicks that have this little thing on the top and whatever, like, would that help? And they're like, actually, that sounds really cool. Like, I love that idea. Or sometimes they're like, no, like, this is just like, they just cannot. And for me, I know that my kids fed, and obviously there's different things, but like, when I notice that we're having these bigger emotions, a lot of times it's because we're also hungry. And if it happens to be around a meal too, it's like, this is maybe not always the time I'm going to pick the battle, because, like, I'm okay with making another sandwich because the outcome of that is going to be a fed kid, which is going to be a calmer kid. They're going to feel better in their body. They're going to be able to handle things better, but that's not how I always do it. Right. And each of my children are so different in what they need. Sometimes it's like, and different days. Right. So like, I love the idea of giving other solutions, hearing what they have to say. They could say, like, I want another sandwich. And you could say, could you, like, what do you think about this idea? You can still offer something, even if they come up with the solution, because sometimes my kids come up with solutions that are not feasible, like, where they're like, Well, yeah, something that would make this better is if we took a trip to the beach right now. And it's like, well, that's not possible, right? So, yes, I love that idea. That sounds amazing. However, right, like today, we do not live anywhere close to the beach. We're in Kansas City. So, going to the beach would be like a plane ride or a very long car drive. So, like, that's not going to happen right now. But, we could play outside in the water after we do this, or we can make a plan for that. I'd love your advice and ideas on that. And so sometimes just being heard in that like crazy idea, instead of just being like, no, stop it. Don't do that. Like, don't talk about that. That's ridiculous. Is not going to get you the outcome that you're wanting. And so sometimes, again, like you said, it's just about being heard. But it can be, parenting's hard.
Yes, 100%. And, it's hard because it's hard, not because you're doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think your point, like we have to get back to our values and our intentions in terms of how we respond, right? So what is important to me around picky eating? Well, okay, that my children what's my list of priorities? My children are fed. Mm-hmm. They have positive experiences at meals. Mm-hmm. Those are number 1 and 2. So as long as those are met, I'm doing a good job. Everything else falls in a bucket of, we can be working on this, right? Mm-hmm. Ross Greene talks about this in I don't know if you read his work, The Explosive.
Yes, love him. Yes.
This is like a Bible for me when my kids were little. Again, especially when I had kids that didn't follow the rules, if you will, of their parenting books, right? And I love his framework of the red and green and yellow behaviors, right? You've got the red behaviors. Those are the ones that are like safety. That's the seatbelt rule. We never veer from that because it's like hardcore safe behaviors. Mm-hmm. The green bucket are all the things we're just constantly letting slide for now. Like maybe when our kid is older, maybe when we're in a different space, we'll deal with that. And the yellow ones are the ones we're working on. But you can't have 400 behaviors in that yellow bucket because your child cannot learn that many things at once. We only get a few. So if there's some picky eating thing you're wanting to address at mealtime and it's aligned with your values and what you think your kid needs, then that's the battle you pick, right? That's the one you really address. Mm-hmm. But you can't do that for all the things at once. Yep. So maybe you're in a space of, I just remake the sandwich because that's really easy. Or maybe you're in a phase of, this is something we're really kind of consciously addressing at every level, and we're working on it.
Yeah.
And then everything else gets in the green bucket for the time being. Mm-hmm. So that you can actually learn.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's when you have too many things, it's so overwhelming for anybody, right? Like I think about the idea of starting a new job, right? And like how many things are coming at you when you're learning a job and how overwhelmed you feel. And so like that doesn't feel good when you're at home, right? Like I personally don't like that piece of like feeling super overwhelmed at home. Like I don't mind learning some new stuff, right? And I love learning actually. It's like something I'm super passionate about, but I don't want to be like drinking from a fire hydrant, right? Like I think when it's like, it's just too much, like you just can't, you can't shower in a fire hydrant. Like I'm just like imagining myself, like that would be so hard, right? And it would hurt. And then I would not want to do it anymore. Right. So then it's like that also is creating behaviors around that. And so I think keeping your kids, Ross Greene also talks about involving your kids in these things of solving problems, right? And getting their buy-in, right? Because even with picky eating, what I've learned is you have to have your kids buy-in, right? Like you're not going to shove the food down their mouth. That would be terrible for both of you. And so getting them to buy into the process and talking about it, but like, exposing them to lots of foods and exposing them to opportunities to do it, that is still growth. And so I think sometimes we always feel like we need to be at the end, right? Like that we've like overcome these things and everybody else's kids are so much easier and they are doing it so much better. And that's just not true. That is not true. Every kid is different. Every human is different. Every parent's different. And I truly have never met a parent who wants to mess up. Right? Everybody wants to do a good job.
Well, and I think exactly, right? Like our kids are wanting to do a good job and so are we. And we're all kind of struggling through this mess together and it's kind of supposed to be messy.
Yeah. which they never tell you before you have kids. They're like, have kids, it will be fun. And it is, but it's also all the other things, challenging, growth oriented, right? Like you're having to learn, like it is a second job, right? Like all the things, like it is, but it is also really fantastic. But it's hard in those moments. Like there have been moments where I'm like, is there a place where you can drop off moms? Like, you know, like you can like leave them for a little bit to, you know, collect themselves. And people are like, you can take them to a spa or to the bar. And I'm like, well, neither of those are always great options. But it's like, you know, sometimes we need a break. And I think, again, about these setting limits and about having boundaries also helps us take care of ourselves. And I think that's the part that helps for me to remind myself too, is like, this is for all of us. Like, this isn't just like me being selfish. Like, I want time to read a book, or I want time to do some work on my computer, or I want to take one kid out on a individual date, or I want to go to Costco by myself, or whatever it is. It's also about having everybody succeed. And that part is hard sometimes because it feels like we're maybe valuing one thing over another. Do you find that parents sometimes feel that way too?
Yeah. And I think, you know, especially for moms, although I see it in dads too, there's this added layer of people pleasing that makes it complicated, right? Girls are socialized from day one to make everybody else the priority. We are not told that it's okay to take up space for ourselves. We are not told it's okay to say, I need this thing or I want this thing. Mm-hmm. And we learn pretty quickly that our role is to make other people happy.
Yeah.
And then you become a parent and your role isn't that, but it's confusing, right? Your role isn't to make your child happy. That's not actually what yes, we want our children to be happy, but our role is to teach them and guide them and to help them develop into healthy individuals, which doesn't mean being happy all the time. Yeah. And we also need to keep ourselves healthy as part of that. And we cannot do that if we're just people pleasing all the time and saying yes or no according to what makes other people happy. And that's like, for me, right, I don't work with children as a clinician. I work with adults and with mothers. And I think that's the work I love doing, right? And that's why I love working with this population, because nothing stirs up stuff that you thought you put to bed, like being a parent. Like everything you thought you had managed, and this happened for me too, whether you've been in therapy or not before, comes right back up when you're a parent. Because all of the stuff that we've been told and kind of all the ways we've been taught to be kind of no longer works. And we have to figure it all out all over again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a rebirth almost, like of figuring out who you are now with this new role. But like also sometimes we're like, hey, I can handle that thing, whatever it was that we put to the side or we felt like we had navigated. And then our kids push against that part. And then there it is popped up and you're like, dang it, I thought I dealt with this. And here it is, right? Feeling inadequate or having disappointment in yourself or trying to keep everybody happy. And I mean, it could be a million different things. But I think it is hard. It is hard to have, nobody has it all together. I think that's what I see in practice is like, I see all kinds of families that all look very different and sometimes similar to each other, but everybody has things that they're working on.
Right. I mean, that's part of the human condition, isn't it? That we are always working on something.
Which is also good because that means we're not robots, right? Like, I think it would be boring if we were all the same.
Completely, yeah. Right? The variety and the change and the growth is what makes life interesting, even if it's also what makes life really painful and challenging.
Exactly. Okay, so what piece of advice would you give to parents, excuse me, when they're feeling overwhelmed? And we've kind of talked about this, but they're struggling to balance these things. Such as self-care, the discipline or like consistency, and this boundary setting / setting limits. What are some advice pieces that you would give to those parents?
I mean, first I would say what we were just talking about, like this is hard stuff. And it's hard because it's meant to be hard.
Yeah.
And you're not doing anything wrong if you find it overwhelming and challenging. But I would also say get support for you, whatever that looks like, right? Support might be your own therapist or or a coach or someone that can help you. It might be, a circle of moms that get it somehow. It might be you just need to go to introvert heaven on a regular basis, right? With a book in your, in a hotel room where you can't even hear your children, whatever it is, or if the key pieces here are expect power struggles, expect this to be hard, and keep yourself regulated. Keeping yourself regulated has to include those elements of self-care, whatever that looks like. And it doesn't have to be, to your point, right? Like, it doesn't have to be go get a massage every week or a pedicure. I mean, right? Sometimes it's go to the dentist when you're supposed to go to the dentist, you go to your own doctor's appointment, and it's these other things, right? Whatever is going to feel good for you and regulating, supporting on a regular basis, keep that as part of the picture. It's so easy to let that stuff go because there's so many things competing for your time. But for you to be able to regulate and show up, you have to have, you yourself has to be a part of the equation.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I was just thinking, something I'm really working on this year is prioritizing sleep, which is an important part of regulation and self-care, right? Yeah. Of when we're exhausted, it's hard to stay regulated. It's so hard, right? And often, I think for parents, the first thing that goes is regular sleep patterns and a regular set amount of sleep.
Yep. Yeah. And I think similarly, nutrition, I think I use the example of when I remember I had two, a baby and a 2-year-old, and, I now have 4, but when I just had the 2, that was for me, the hardest transition was 1 to 2 actually. And my lunch would just be whatever they didn't eat off their plates. Cause I didn't want to take the time to make myself something. So I would have a quarter of a peanut butter and jelly and 2 chicken nuggets and some goldfish, because it was just easier. And then the food didn't go to waste. And it was it's fine if that's what I wanted to eat, but it was so symbolic of how I was living my whole life in that moment, right? Food, leftovers, whatever the kids didn't want. The time that I took for myself was whatever the kids didn't take, which meant 0, right? Is when I could do it around the kids. And so that's a recipe for burnout right there, because you're not in control of any of it. And it's not enough, right? You cannot subsist on leftovers of all of these things, right? So where can you put in your own intentional lunchtime, right? Literally and metaphorically, whether that is sleep or food or time for yourself, right? Stop living on leftovers so that you can regulate.
I love that. Thank you so much for today. You have been such a great guest. Sorry, we're just getting over sickness at our house, so clearing my throat over here. It has been awesome to talk to you, and I think this has been such a great conversation and so many pieces that I'm going to be taking away.
Amazing. Well, it was really fun to be here.
Thanks again, Anne. That was such a great conversation. I think the thing I'm taking away most is just that struggles are part of the process and is not a reflection of how well you're parenting. I think that was such a great thing for Anne to help us to understand. Anne also offers mom groups. If you're interested in joining one of her virtual groups, please check our show notes for that link. With that, I will say thank you so much for your time today. Please like and subscribe to our show. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And also keep the emails coming with future topic suggestions for our show to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.